Seal followed his dog to an abandoned cabin. What waited inside changed his life forever. The Oregon coast was a long bruise of gray and green, where the sea and the sky blurred into one restless horizon. The wind came in cold from the Pacific, carrying the smell of salt, pine, and distant rain. It was the kind of place that didn't care who you were or what you'd done. It simply outlasted you. Caleb Warren had come here to disappear. Once a Navy SEAL, he now lived in a cabin barely large enough to hold his guilt. The locals saw him sometimes in town, silent, broad-shouldered, with a haunted look that made conversation die on the tongue. He came for supplies, for gas, for dog food. Then he vanished again into the mist. His only company was Odin, a black and tan German shepherd with the posture of a soldier and the eyes of an old soul. They'd served together overseas, where Odin had saved lives and taken down men whose faces Caleb still saw in his sleep. Out here, far from war, the dog still moved with that quiet vigilance. Every sound mattered. Every shadow had a story. That afternoon, the rain was soft, almost respectful. Caleb walked the shoreline, boots sinking into wet sand, Odin a few paces ahead. The ocean was a living pulse beside them, violent, beautiful, indifferent. Caleb preferred its company. Waves didn't ask questions. Then Odin stopped. The shift was instant, a tension that rippled through the dog's frame. His ears snapped forward, nose cutting the air. Caleb froze, the reflex automatic. For a heartbeat, there was only wind. Then Odin growled, a low, deliberate vibration that came from deep inside him. "What is it, boy?" Caleb whispered. Odin didn't answer, of course. He moved toward the tree line, his steps slow, measured. Caleb followed, senses sharpening. The forest waited beyond the dunes, thick and wet, branches dripping from the morning storm. He'd walked this route for months, but the way Odin moved now, cautious, certain, made his stomach tighten. Halfway up the slope, the smell changed. Beneath the salt and moss came something foreign. Smoke, faint but real. Odin paused again, looking back at Caleb as if to say, "You smell it too." Then he pushed deeper into the woods. The sound of the sea faded behind them. The forest closed in, swallowing the light. Caleb's heartbeat synced with the rhythm of Odin's movements, two shadows gliding through green twilight. Moss hung like curtains from old spruce trees. The air was damp, heavy, alive. Odin stopped at a break in the trees. Ahead, half hidden under a curtain of vines, was a structure, a cabin. It leaned slightly to one side, built from dark logs slick with rain. The windows were shuttered. The roof sagged under years of moss. It didn't belong here, and yet it looked as if it had always been waiting. Caleb's first thought was simple. No one should be living this deep in. His second was darker. Someone was hiding. He crouched beside Odin, scanning the clearing. No footprints, no smoke, just the faintest trace of ash in the air. The dog's hackles stood. His eyes locked on the door. "Stay close," Caleb murmured. He stepped forward, slow and silent, years of training returning like muscle memory. His fingers brushed the pistol holstered under his jacket. Every creak of the wood sounded too loud. Odin followed, breathing steady, muscles tight. Then, from inside, came a sound so faint it barely existed, a cough, a child's cough. Then another sound, weak and uneven. Breathing. Caleb froze. For a long second his brain refused to connect the dots. The cabin looked dead. The forest was empty. And yet, behind that warped wooden door, someone was alive. He pressed closer, listening. Another cough, then a whisper. A woman's voice, hoarse, pleading. "Please! Someone!" The sound hit him harder than any explosion. Because it wasn't fear that filled her voice, it was exhaustion. the kind that meant she'd already accepted the worst. Caleb took a breath, hand hovering near his weapon. He eased the door open. The hinges moaned. A wave of cold, stale air rolled out, carrying the scent of damp wood, smoke, and sickness. Inside was a single room, dim and flickering with the glow of a dying fire. On a cot near the wall lay a woman, pale, drenched in sweat. Her hair clung to her face. Beside her, a little girl, maybe 5, maybe 6, sat perfectly still, clutching a blanket around her shoulders. Her eyes were too old for her face. Odin moved first, slipping in silently, nose twitching, assessing. The girl tensed, then stared at the dog with something close to wonder. The woman's eyes fluttered open. Who are you?" she managed. "Name's Caleb," he said, scanning the room. "You're sick. How long have you been here?" 3 days, she whispered. "Maybe 4. Fever. I can't—" Her words trailed off into a violent cough. Caleb knelt beside her, checking her pulse, her skin temperature. High fever. Dehydration. She was burning up. The girl spoke softly, voice trembling. "Mum says we can't leave. He'll find us." Caleb looked up. "Who?" But the woman's eyes rolled back, her body going limp with exhaustion. The girl's small hand clutched her mother's sleeve. He didn't ask again. Not yet. Odin's low growl broke the silence. He'd turned toward the window, ears pricked. Caleb followed his gaze. Movement, far out among the trees. Just a flicker. A shadow shifting where no shadow should. Someone was out there. Caleb rose, scanning the perimeter, mind-shifting gears. Whoever he was, he might already be close. He checked the fireplace. Barely any fuel left. A few cans of food stacked neatly. A child's backpack in the corner, expensive, out of place. No phone, no generator, no radio. Whoever these two were, they hadn't planned to be here long. He turned back to the woman, her breathing shallow, uneven. The girl stared at him, terrified, but silent. Caleb felt the weight of 1,000 memories pressing down, the faces he'd failed to save, the ones who had died waiting for help that never came. He should walk away, call it in, pretend he never found them. But Odin sat by the cot now, tail still, eyes locked on the woman's face, waiting. Caleb understood the look. It wasn't curiosity. It was loyalty. He exhaled slowly. "All right, boy," he murmured. "We're not walking away from this one, are we?" Odin's only answer was a soft thump of his tail on the floorboards. Outside, thunder rolled far off the coast. The storm was coming back. Caleb looked once more at the girl, then at her mother. "Hang in there," he said quietly. "I'll be back before dark." He stepped out into the rain, Odin close behind, the forest swallowing them whole. The waves crashed somewhere beyond the trees, and the wind carried the echo of a child's cough long after they were gone. What Caleb didn't know, what neither of them could know, was that the moment he opened that cabin door, the life he'd been running from had already found him again. And this time, it wouldn't let him go. The wind howled through the trees as Caleb pushed the cabin door shut behind him. The hinges protested with a low groan. Odin stayed by the woman's side, unmoving. The dog's focus hadn't shifted, not even once from the cot. His ears stayed alert, his body rigid, like he understood something even Caleb didn't. The fire sputtered low in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the rough wooden walls. Caleb dropped to one knee beside the cot, eyes scanning the woman's face, pale, sunken, glistening with fever sweat. Her skin was hot to the touch, too hot. "You with me?" he asked. Her eyes fluttered open, bloodshot and unfocused. "She needs to be safe," she whispered. Her voice was cracked, barely there. "Don't let him find her. Please." "Who's looking for you?" he asked, gently lifting her wrist to check her pulse. "Tell me what happened," She didn't answer. Her head lolled to the side, her strength spent. But her hand reached out, blindly searching until it found the girl's. The child had moved closer. She stood now at the foot of the cot, small and watchful, arms crossed over her chest. There was no fear on her face, only an eerie calm that sent a chill down Caleb's spine. "What's your name?" he asked softly. She hesitated. "June," she said. Her voice was quiet but steady. "This is my mum." Caleb nodded. "I'm Caleb. That's Odin." June's gaze drifted to the dog. For a brief second, something softened in her expression. Then the walls went back up. She stepped between her mother and Caleb, like a soldier taking post. Protective, resolved. "You live out here?" Caleb asked. June shook her head. "How long have you been in this cabin?" She didn't answer that one. The silence filled with the subtle wheeze of Lena's breathing. The fever was getting worse. Her body trembled under the thin blankets. Caleb stood and did a quick scan of the cabin. It was stripped bare. A single pot on the hearth, 2 blankets, no electricity, no stocked shelves. There was a bucket of water, half full. A few old canned goods. 1 child's backpack. That was it. He spotted a satellite phone in the shadows, half buried under a jacket. Its screen was dark, cracked, dead weight. He crouched near Lena again. "You have a fever. You need fluids. Antibiotics." "She won't let me leave," June said suddenly. Caleb looked up. "She keeps saying if we leave he'll find us. He's always looking." The sentence hit hard in the silence. Caleb didn't ask who he was. Not yet. "Is anyone else coming?" he asked. June looked down at her shoes. "No." Caleb ran a hand down his face. He could feel the storm returning outside, the pressure in the air shifting. Night was coming. The temperature would drop. If Lena's fever spiked, her body wouldn't hold out. He moved to the corner, pulled the girl's backpack closer, and checked it for supplies. Some children's clothes, an empty granola bar wrapper, a crumpled coloring book. Then something odd. Tucked deep in a side pocket was a flash drive, sealed in a watertight pouch. He didn't touch it. "What's this for?" he asked, nodding at the bag. June hugged herself tighter. "That's her work stuff. She said it was important." Odin let out a low, concerned whine. Caleb took a breath. Everything in him said, walk away. He'd done his part, called it in mentally, documented it, let it go. But he didn't move. He looked at June again, standing there in 2 thin socks, trying to be a guardian when she was still small enough to need one herself. Odin nudged his leg, a nudge that said, "We're not done here. I have a cabin, about 5 miles south." Caleb said finally, "It's stocked. I can bring back medical gear, food, water. It'll take me a few hours." "No," June said quickly, a flicker of panic breaking through her calm. "Don't leave us." Caleb knelt to her level. "You said you've been here 3, maybe 4 days. You're strong, but you can't do this alone. Not through another night." June didn't answer. Her lips pressed into a tight, worried line. "I'll be back before dark," he said. "You promise?" He nodded. "I never break a promise." He grabbed a weathered field notebook from his coat pocket, tore out a page, and scrawled a map, just in case. He handed it to June. "If anything happens, if someone comes, take your mum, follow this to the edge of the river. There's a downed log you can cross. Keep going south till you see a shack with red paint on the door. That's mine." June took the paper with trembling fingers. Caleb stood, threw one last look at Lena's still body, and gave Odin a nod. The dog moved to the girl's side and licked her hand. She didn't flinch. "You're staying?" she asked him. Odin looked up at Caleb. Caleb paused, then pointed 2 fingers to the ground. "Guard." The dog stayed. It was a calculated choice. Odin was more than a companion. He was security, a silent message to anyone who might come looking. This place isn't unguarded. As Caleb stepped into the growing wind and shut the cabin door behind him, the weight of the decision settled like wet stone on his shoulders. He hadn't just agreed to help a sick woman and her child. He'd agreed to stand between them and whatever past was still hunting them. The forest didn't speak as he moved. The light was draining from the sky, and the trail back to his cabin was steep, slick, and treacherous. But his pace was fast, sure, his mind already cataloguing supplies, antibiotics, IV kit, calorie bars, water purifier, flashlight, ammo. The kind of things you carry when you're not just saving someone's life, but preparing to defend it. And beneath all that planning was the growing certainty of something he couldn't name. Something that felt like the first time in a long time he wasn't running from the past. He was walking toward a purpose. Back at the cabin, Odin lay down at the edge of the cot, head on his paws, eyes fixed on the front door. He didn't blink, didn't sleep. He was a soldier once, and he knew how to wait for orders. He also knew how to stand guard over something worth protecting. The rain had picked up again by the time Caleb reached the edge of the bluff above his cabin. It came in sideways now, needling through the trees, soaking the back of his neck. But he barely noticed. His thoughts were somewhere else, back in Syria 2 years ago in a compound courtyard smeared with blood and smoke. Ben's face came back in pieces. The moment he made the wrong call, the doorway that looked clear but wasn't, the detonation, the sound, the silence that followed. Trust had cost Ben his life, and now Caleb was risking it again, for a woman he'd known all of 30 minutes and a girl whose eyes held more war than most soldiers. He hit the cabin fast. Gear already listed in his head. Antibiotics, fluids, trauma kit, the SIG holstered, extra mags, a ration box. He moved like a machine, no wasted motion. But somewhere under the layers of training, a quiet truth kept rising. He wanted them to live, not out of duty, out of something that scared him more. By the time he was packed, the wind had turned. Sharp, coastal. It howled through the pines as he climbed back towards the ridge, the pack heavy across his shoulders. Mud sucked at his boots. Branches clawed at his jacket. He pushed harder, faster. When he reached the hidden trail leading to the cabin, the first thing he noticed was Odin. The dog stood outside, head low, ears sharp, watching the trees. Not tense, not alarmed, alert. Caleb didn't speak, just raised a hand in silent greeting. Odin wagged his tail once, then turned and disappeared inside. Caleb followed. Inside, the fire was dim but alive. June sat by the hearth, arms wrapped around her knees, her head resting lightly against Odin's flank. The dog was a stone beside her, steady, unmoving, the very image of protection. Lena still lay on the cot, but her breathing had changed. It was raspier now, deeper in the chest. She was pale, sweating through her shirt. Her lips cracked, her skin hot. She turned her head slightly as Caleb approached, her eyes fluttering open. "You came back," she murmured. "Didn't make promises I don't intend to keep." He dropped the pack beside the cot and went to work. Gloves on. IV hung from the low ceiling beam. He cleaned her arm, found the vein, inserted the needle with a smooth, practiced motion. Fluid started dripping. A lifeline in a plastic bag. He ground up the antibiotic tab into water and slowly coaxed her to drink. She gagged, coughed, but swallowed. June watched everything without a word. Odin shifted only to press his nose gently to Lena's ankle, as if checking for a pulse himself. "She's going to be all right," Caleb said softly. June didn't nod, but her fingers unclenched a little. When Lena finally drifted into sleep, her body slack, Caleb took the moment to breathe. He sat by the hearth, peeled off his soaked jacket, Let the warmth sink in. The wind rattled the cabin's seams, but inside it was still, until June stood up. She walked over to the corner, knelt beside her backpack, and unzipped the main pocket. She pulled something from it, small, black, and sealed in a plastic sleeve. Then she crossed the room and held it out to Caleb. He took it carefully. A flash drive, unmarked, clean, modern. "What's on it?" he asked. June didn't answer right away. Her face was tight, unreadable. Then, barely above a whisper, "Proof." Caleb looked up at her. "Proof of what?" June glanced at her mother, then back at him. "Of why he's after us." A long silence stretched between them. The fire popped softly behind him. Caleb held up the drive. "Who's he?" June didn't speak. A quiet cough broke the silence. Lena had stirred, eyes half open, her voice thin but clear. "Vincent Hale." The name landed like a gunshot in the small room. Caleb's jaw clenched. He knew that name. Everyone did. CEO of Hale Tech, a corporate titan with $1 million smile and enough private security to wage a small war. On camera, he was philanthropy and progress. Off camera, there were whispers, NDAs, lawsuits that disappeared. "He's June's grandfather," Lena said, forcing herself upright. Caleb blinked. "What?" Lena nodded slowly, pain etched into every movement. "Her parents were killed. A boating accident. The trust fund, everything went to June, but she doesn't get full access until she turns 21. Caleb's stomach turned. "He was made guardian," Lena continued. "But it wasn't about love. It was about money, about control. He had her under surveillance, medication, isolation. I worked for him. I saw it all. He's been grooming her to become obedient, quiet. He wanted to mold her into a signature." She pointed weakly at the drive in Caleb's hand. "That's what I took. Emails, audio files, videos, transactions, all of it. Things that could destroy him. I didn't mean to run, but once I had it, I knew he'd never let her go." Caleb looked at June again. The silence between them cracked wide open. He saw her now, not just as a scared kid in the woods, but as a walking target in a billionaire's game. He exhaled slowly, then handed the drive back. June didn't take it. "You keep it," she said. Odin stirred beside her and rose to his feet. He stepped beside Caleb now, positioning himself between man and girl. It wasn't protection. It was recognition. She had passed the test. The girl had just handed over $1 billion secret without blinking. Caleb tucked the drive into a hidden pocket inside his vest, his mind already playing the angles, legal routes, military contacts, exit strategies, surveillance sweeps. But even as his training took over, something else settled beneath it. Loyalty, the kind that came without orders. He stood, checked the IV line again, adjusted Lena's blanket. "You bought time," he said. "Now let's figure out how to spend it." Outside, the storm screamed louder, but inside, for the first time since he opened that door, it felt like a plan was beginning to form. And Caleb Warren, man of exile, soldier without a mission, had just found a war worth fighting again. The fever finally broke near dawn. Lena lay still, eyes open, clearer than before. Her skin was still pale, but her breathing had settled, no longer ragged, no longer on the edge of collapse. Caleb sat by the hearth, sharpening a knife with slow, even strokes. June slept curled beside Odin, one hand tucked into the dog's coat like it had always been there. Odin didn't move. He never did when she slept. He just watched. "I thought we were going to die in that place," Lena said, her voice dry but steady. Caleb didn't look up. "You almost did." Silence held for a few heartbeats, then she pushed herself upright. Caleb set the knife down and handed her the canteen. "You're not out of the woods yet," he said. We're not out of anything, she replied. Not with Vincent out there. Her words sat like a brick on the room. Caleb glanced at June, still sleeping. She's tough. Reminds me of someone. Lena managed the ghost of a smile. She didn't used to be. He made her like this. She sipped the water, then leaned back against the wall. Her hand drifted to her daughter's backpack near the cot, checking if the flash drive was still there. Caleb didn't tell her he'd already stashed it elsewhere. Better if only he knew. We need to move, Lena said. Where? Caleb asked. He has resources. He'll be watching roads, credit cards, fuel stops. This isn't a guy who sends thugs. He sends professionals. She nodded. Exactly. Which is why we need a plan. Not just to run, to disappear. Caleb stood and paced. The cabin was tight, remote, camouflaged. But it wasn't invisible, and the longer they stayed, the more likely it was that someone would find them. I have a fallback location, he said finally. Another site about 10 miles north. Old fire tower. Out of range from cell pings. No clear roads in. Lena looked at him, calculating. You built it? I rebuilt it, years ago, before I gave up building anything. We'll need to move at night. Tomorrow, if your body holds. Odin's ears twitched. His head rose. Caleb froze. The dog stood, moving to the door with fluid precision. What is it? Lena whispered. Odin didn't bark. He never barked unless he wanted someone to know he was there. This was different. He was listening. Caleb crossed to the window, wiped a clean circle through the grime. The wind howled against the glass, but beneath it was something else, something too soft for normal ears. Then Odin growled, low, controlled. We're not alone, Caleb said. Lena's face lost what little color it had regained. She pulled the blanket off and stood slowly. Her hands shook. Stay here, Caleb said, pulling the rifle from the wall and checking the chamber. She stepped in front of him. No, you're not facing this alone. Odin was now at the window, tail stiff, body forward. Caleb peered through the trees. A flicker, then another. Shadows in motion, maybe 100 yards out. Too disciplined for wildlife. 3 of them, moving in a V pattern. Rifle team. Caleb muttered. They're flanking. Lena grabbed June's pack and tossed Caleb the smaller emergency bag he'd prepped earlier. We go out the back. They'll expect that. We stay? We hold. Caleb moved fast, pushed the table to the side, pulled down the blackout curtain from the window, nailed it shut. Then he turned to Lena and June. Take the back corner. No windows. Low profile. If it goes south, you take Odin and run north into the trees. Got it? June nodded before Lena could answer. Caleb loaded a fresh mag. Odin moved to his side without a word. Then a sound outside. A soft crunch. Deliberate. A man's voice. Clear, even. Too calm. Miss Brooks, the voice called. We're not here to hurt you. Caleb stiffened. The voice came from the tree line. Confident, professional. My name is Ryder Black. You've made things more complicated than they needed to be. Lena grabbed Caleb's arm. That's him. Vincent's contractor. Private security. Ex-Special Forces. He's the one who found us in Idaho. Outside, the man kept talking. You have something that doesn't belong to you. Return it, and this ends quietly. There's a car waiting 2 miles down the trail. No police, no questions, just cooperation. Caleb leaned to the side of the window and glimpsed a silhouette, tall, trim, body armor beneath a windbreaker. Ryder Black stood with his hands visible, no weapon drawn. But Caleb knew better. The rifle was probably slung low or carried by the 2 ghosts in the trees. We don't want bloodshed, Ryder said. But my orders are clear. Caleb opened the door just a crack. Not enough for a shot, just enough for his voice to carry. She doesn't have what you think. A pause. Mr. Warren? Ryder said, amused. You were a ghost, hard to find. But not hard enough. Vincent sends his regards. He says he expected better from you. Caleb's blood cooled. He didn't get it. You've been off-grid for a while. Maybe you forgot how things work. But I didn't. So here's your final offer. Step outside, leave the girl, walk away clean. Inside the cabin, June was clutching Odin's fur. The dog leaned into her, solid as a wall. No deal, Caleb said. There was no reply, only wind. Then, from the tree line, a green flare arced into the sky, bright and silent. A signal. Caleb ducked just as a flashbang shattered the cabin window. The blast hit like a punch to the chest. Light, sound, smoke. Odin lunged toward the door with a roar. Caleb raised his rifle. The battle had begun, and the quiet soldier who came here to disappear was about to make his presence violently known. The first shot cracked like thunder, punching a hole clean through the front door. Caleb rolled low, rifle up, eyes scanning. He caught the blur of a figure dashing from one tree to another and squeezed off 2 quick shots. The man dropped into cover behind a mossy log, but not before Caleb saw him flinch. Glass rained from the shattered window. Smoke began to snake into the cabin, stinging his eyes. The air filled with the sharp tang of gunpowder, mixed with the damp rot of old wood and wet earth. Odin! Caleb barked. The dog launched forward, leaping through the broken window with a snarl that sent a tremor through the forest. Outside, a scream followed. Sharp, human, choked off mid-breath. Caleb knew that sound. Flesh and teeth had just met. Inside, Lena had June tucked behind the woodpile, her own body shielding the girls. She was pale, still recovering, but her eyes were locked on Caleb, waiting. Caleb moved to the door, dropped to one knee and peeked through the crack. The gunman behind the log was fumbling to reload. Caleb shifted, lined up his sights. But the world exploded again. A flashbang slammed into the center of the room. Caleb had just enough time to shout, "Down!" before the blast swallowed everything. Light, sound, pressure. His ears rang. His vision blanked out in a wash of white. He hit the floor hard, arms scrambling for a weapon that suddenly wasn't in his hands anymore. His limbs refused to respond. Static buzzed in his brain. Shadows moved through the haze. Heavy boots. Voices, garbled and clipped. Clear. Target restrained. Hands grabbed his arms. A knee pinned his back. Plastic zip ties cinched around his wrists, biting deep. He couldn't see Odin, couldn't hear Lena or June. Then someone yanked him upright. Vision returning now. Through the fog, Caleb saw the outlines. Ryder stood in the center of the cabin like he owned it. One of his men lay groaning outside, blood streaking the leaves where Odin had struck. Another held Lena against the wall, gun pressed to her ribs. June was silent, her eyes wide and wild, locked on Odin, who was struggling beneath the weight of a third man trying to hold him down. Caleb's heart screamed, but his voice was calm. "You're making a mistake," he said. Ryder turned, face blank, gun held low but ready. He walked over to Caleb and stared at him for a long moment, then drove a hard punch into his ribs. Caleb doubled over, breath gone. "That was for the guy your mutt tore up," Ryder said. "He'll live. Barely." Caleb coughed, then slowly lifted his head. "You don't want to do this," he said. "There are things you don't understand." "I understand everything I need to," Ryder replied. He raised the pistol, barrel aimed squarely at Caleb's chest. "Orders were to retrieve the asset and contain the problem. You're the problem." "No," Caleb said, voice low. "I'm the insurance policy." Ryder frowned. "I'm a Tier 1 operator." Caleb continued. "Inactive, not retired. I filed a movement ping with SOCOM before I went dark. That ping updates every 12 hours. If it doesn't check in..." He paused, let the silence fill the room. They come looking. Ryder's jaw tightened. You're bluffing. Caleb didn't blink. Try me. The pistol didn't waver, but something shifted behind Ryder's eyes. You're not worth that kind of trouble, he said. Then why am I still breathing? That landed. Ryder lowered the gun slightly, glancing at his team. The one outside was moaning now, trying to sit up. Odin, bloodied but alive, snarled beneath his captor. Then Lena spoke. Her voice was raw, steady, and louder than it should have been. He's not bluffing, and neither am I. Ryder turned. Lena was upright now, despite the bruises, despite the fever that had drained her hours earlier. She held June behind her with one arm. The other hand gripped her daughter's backpack. You think this is just about a kid and a paycheck? She said. You're wrong. She unzipped the side pocket, pulled out the flash drive, and held it up between two fingers. This has everything on Vincent Hale. Embezzlement, market manipulation, wire fraud, government bribery. And if we die, if I so much as miss a 24-hour biometric check-in, the contents go straight to the press. Ryder stared at her. You're bluffing. No, she said, taking a slow step forward. I'm gambling. That's different. Ryder didn't answer. She nodded toward Caleb. You kill him. You trigger a military response. You kill me. You trigger a political one. Either way, you lose. He studied her face. Studied Caleb. Then looked at June. The child hadn't moved. She stood with her arms wrapped around Odin's neck, her little body shaking, but her eyes never left Ryder's. The room shifted. The dynamic broke. For the first time, Ryder hesitated. Caleb saw it. The calculation. He wasn't a zealot, he was a contractor. And right now, the mission didn't feel clean anymore. Ryder lowered his weapon a full inch. This drive, he said. It's real? Lena nodded. I'll prove it. One file, enough to verify, not enough to burn him yet. Why not just go public? Because I wanted a chance to live, she said. And maybe give you one, too. Ryder looked down at his gun, then holstered it. Untie him, he said. His team hesitated. Now. The zip ties came off. Caleb's arms ached as circulation returned. He staggered to his feet, locked eyes with Lena. A silent question passed between them. What happens next? Lena gave a breathless smile. We make them choose. Caleb turned to Ryder. You came here to finish a job, he said. Now's your moment of truth. What kind of man are you? Ryder didn't answer, but he didn't reach for his weapon again either. Outside, the storm raged on. But for the first time since it began, the people inside the cabin weren't the ones running from it. For a long moment, no one moved. The room held its breath. Caleb stood tall, shoulders squared, blood still drying on his temple. Lena remained beside June, her hand tight on the girl's backpack, the flash drive now resting on the table like a live explosive. Odin stood in the center, breathing heavy, his eyes locked on Ryder Black. The mercenary's jaw ticked. He wasn't stupid. He'd seen operations fall apart before. He'd seen missions turn to mud when greed or ego clouded the plan. But this was different. This wasn't about chaos or failure. This was something he hadn't expected. Leverage. He glanced out the broken window at the first grey streaks of dawn climbing over the tree line. His injured man groaned outside, slumped against a tree, leg wrapped in gauze and guilt. The third, younger and shaken, stood by the door, waiting for orders that no longer made sense. Ryder turned his gaze to Lena. You're saying, he began slowly, voice cold, you'll just vanish. Leave Hale in the clear. No threats, no press, no trail. Lena nodded. You get what you want. He gets what he wants. Everyone walks. Ryder looked at Caleb. And him? He dies with us, Lena said. At least on paper. Ryder raised a brow. You trust him that much? No, she said, but I know he's the kind of man who finishes what he starts. Caleb didn't flinch. I'm not here to expose Hale. I'm here to protect a little girl. If walking into the fire is what keeps her safe, then that's the road I take. Silence stretched again. Then Lena stepped forward and opened the backpack. She pulled out a second, smaller flash drive. A decoy, a decapitated piece of a larger monster. She placed it gently on the table and slid it across to Ryder. Encrypted, she said. But I'll give you one key. It contains internal memos, proof of insider trading. It's enough to convince him we're gone, but not enough to bury him. Ryder stared at the drive. His lips parted, then closed again. He picked it up, examined it, then tucked it into his jacket. If I do this, he said, you disappear forever. You don't resurface, you don't come back, you don't breathe his name. We don't even whisper it, Caleb said. Ryder looked at June. The little girl stood by Odin's flank, eyes dark and steady. He saw something ancient in her gaze, something that didn't belong in a child's face. She's not like other kids, he said. No, Lena whispered, because men like Hale tried to make her forget what innocence is. Ryder looked away. A flicker of discomfort passed through his expression. Maybe he'd seen it before. Another job, another child, another silence. Maybe he'd chosen the money too many times to count. But this time, the stakes felt personal. He gave a small nod. All right, he said. Let's burn the lie. The rest moved fast. Tactical minds don't waste time once a decision's made. Ryder's team gathered accelerant from their gear. Caleb emptied a crate of old rags and soaked them. They staged a struggle near the hearth, overturned chairs, blood from a bandage pressed onto the floor, scattered papers. A child's drawing half-burned at the corner. Odin even left tufts of fur behind, torn loose from earlier in the fight. Outside, Caleb doused the perimeter with diesel from the emergency tank. Ryder set the signal flare, snapped to burn hot and fast. Lena pulled June aside, knelt low. You sure you're ready? She asked. June looked at the cabin, the place she'd almost died in, the place where she'd watched her mother come back to life. I don't want to remember it, she said. I want to forget. Odin walked beside her, brushing her hand with his nose. Inside, Caleb grabbed one last item, a photo from the mantel that wasn't theirs. It had been there long before them. A couple from decades past, smiling in black and white, standing in front of the very same cabin. He pocketed it. Not for sentiment, for memory. The moment the flare touched the floor, flame leapt like a living thing. The dry timber caught fast. Within seconds, heat swelled through the walls. The air inside turned heavy, smoky. The roof groaned. The four of them, Caleb, Lena, June, and Odin, moved back into the tree line. Ryder and his men followed at a distance, already preparing to vanish. The cabin burned hard and fast. A tower of fire in the grey morning woods. Smoke curled high above the trees, thick and black, a signal to no one and everyone. Standing beneath the glow, Ryder turned to Caleb. If anyone ever comes asking, I never met you, he said. Caleb nodded once. And if Hale ever looks again, you'll regret leaving us breathing. Ryder didn't answer, but the smile that touched his lips was something like respect. Then he disappeared into the woods, his team ghosting after him. Caleb, Lena, and June stood in the hush that followed. Odin pressed close to June's side. The girl reached down and rested a hand on his back. Behind them, the last of the flames consumed the cabin. The roof caved. The fire roared. 3 people died in that fire, according to every official report. But 3 others walked away into the wilderness, smoke clinging to their clothes, their eyes, and the unspoken promise that no one would ever find them again. The old cabin creaked like it was waking from a long sleep. Dust swirled in golden shafts of morning light as Caleb pushed open the warped front door. Odin bounded in first, tail wagging, nose twitching at the scents of moss, pine, and faded wood smoke. Behind him came Lena, holding June's small hand. The girl's wide eyes darted around the room, uncertain but curious. "This place," Lena whispered. "It feels like it remembers things." Caleb smiled faintly. "It does. Most of them I'd rather forget." They stayed quiet for a moment, letting the silence settle. It wasn't awkward. It was the kind of silence that held space, that allowed breathing. Odin padded over to the fireplace and sniffed the cold ashes, then flopped down like he'd lived there his whole life. That night, they made soup from canned goods Caleb had kept in a rusted tin chest. They lit the old lanterns. June curled up on a pile of wool blankets near the fire. Odin snuggled beside her. Her hand rested gently on his fur. It was the first time she'd fallen asleep without flinching in weeks. The next morning, her voice cracked the air like sunlight through clouds. "Odin," she said softly, brushing his ears. "You smell like a bear." Lena froze. Caleb did too. "Did you just—" June giggled, covering her mouth like she'd stolen something precious. Caleb crouched beside her, heart thudding. "Say it again, sweetheart." June looked up at him, her voice still quiet but steady. "Odin smells like a bear." Lena's eyes welled up. She turned away fast, pretending to stoke the fire. Caleb didn't hide his tears. That day the mood in the cabin shifted. Caleb cleaned out the broken windows, Lena organized supplies, and June played tag with Odin outside, shrieking with laughter as he gently chased her in circles around the trees. At one point, she climbed onto a boulder, hands on her hips, declaring herself Queen of the Woods. Odin sat like a royal guard below her. Lena leaned against the cabin doorway, arms crossed, a soft smile on her face. "She's healing, Caleb." "She is," he said. "Because of you." "No," Lena said quietly. "Because of you, too." That evening, as June and Odin napped together in a sunbeam, Lena sat Caleb down with a map. "There's a contact in Vancouver," she said. "A program. Quiet relocation for people like us. They can help." Caleb studied the map but didn't respond. "We could disappear, start over. You wouldn't have to keep looking over your shoulder." He looked out the window at the mountains. "I've been hiding most of my life," he said. "Running. Surviving. This is the first time I've actually felt like I'm living." Lena's face softened. "You're scared it'll end." "No," he said. "I'm scared it'll be taken." They sat in silence again, the fire popping gently beside them. Odin stirred, lifting his head like he was listening. Later that night, Caleb stepped outside alone. The air was cold but clean. Stars burned overhead. He looked at the cabin, the soft yellow glow inside, the shadows of Lena and June moving, Odin curled by the window. Something settled in his chest that hadn't been there in years. He turned when he heard the door creak. Lena stepped out, pulling her coat tighter. "I won't go if you don't want me to," she said. He shook his head. "I want you to. I just don't know if I can follow." "You don't have to decide tonight. I think Odin already has." They both looked at the window, where Odin now sat upright, staring straight into the forest, ears alert. Caleb followed his gaze. "Something out there?" Lena asked. Caleb nodded slowly. "He only sits like that when something's wrong." A beat passed. Then Odin growled, low and sharp. Caleb's hand moved to the shotgun inside the door. Lena whispered, "We're not safe yet, are we?" Caleb's jaw clenched. "No, but we're ready this time. Inside, June sat up, sensing the shift. She whispered into Odin's fur. "Still guarding?" Odin didn't move, but his tail thumped once. Outside, wind whispered through the trees like a warning, and the past was still out there, watching, waiting. But so was Odin, and that changed everything. The first frost came early. It dusted the evergreens in silver and crept down the mountain, brushing the roof of the old cabin like a cautious whisper. Inside, warmth flickered from a wood stove Caleb had rebuilt himself, using salvaged brick, iron scraps, and memory. Odin lay stretched out in front of it, his chest rising slow, steady, the faint hum in his throat like the mountain breathing. It had been a month since the fire. Since the bodies were pulled from the creekside trail and the wreckage of Vincent Hale's operation began to smolder from the inside out. Lena stood at the window that morning, a chipped mug of coffee in hand, her eyes locked on the snow line. The cell signal had been weak, just enough to deliver one message from her former contact at the DOJ. "You were right. Vincent's being quietly investigated. Anonymous source leaked server footage. Haletech stock down 31% in 48 hours. SEC is circling." She read it twice before passing the phone to Caleb, whose face didn't change much. He just nodded once, tucked the phone in his jacket, and walked outside. Odin followed, ears perked. No one would ever trace the source back to them. Not officially. Not through any line that mattered. But they knew. The real flame had been lit the moment Lena broke into that vault, and Caleb shoved that black drive into the fireproof bag. What happened after? The fire, the rescue, the national headline about the Phoenix cabin explosion was just gravity catching up with truth. And yet, life didn't feel victorious. It felt quiet. It felt like waiting. Caleb was building things again. A pen for Odin behind the cabin, reinforced with split logs and lined with gravel. June had taken to planting hardy winter flowers around the front porch, telling Odin all about each bulb as she knelt in the dirt. Lena, still limping slightly from her fractured ankle, had turned the old pantry into a command post. A whiteboard of names and dates, printouts taped along the walls, timelines connecting the fall of Haletech to other players in the background. They knew this wasn't over. Haletech was just the first brick. The system that had protected men like Vincent for years wasn't going to collapse overnight. But something had begun. One afternoon, Caleb found Lena on the porch with Odin curled at her feet, his muzzle resting on her boot. "You miss it?" he asked, sitting beside her. His jacket was dusted with sawdust. He smelled like pine and smoke. "Miss what?" she asked. "Running, hiding, burning things down." She smiled without humor. "I miss believing the world can be clean, but I'd settle for knowing we made a dent." They sat in silence. Odin's ears twitched. A raven croaked overhead. The wind shifted. Then Lena spoke again. "The story's already moving. That article, no byline, no source, but every fact was right. Someone's paying attention." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "Not you." She shook her head. "I never sent it. I gave the drive to you, remember? I burned it after I copied it to a decoy phone. Hid that inside the old well pump down the ridge." Lena turned slowly toward him. "You didn't tell me that." "I didn't tell anyone." A long beat passed. Then they both smiled, crooked, tired, relieved. Back inside, June had set the table with what little they had. Soup in mismatched bowls, fresh bread from the neighbors down the hill. A radio played softly in the corner. Just static at first, then the low hum of a voice familiar to both Caleb and Lena. It was Callie's voice, broadcasting again from the makeshift mountaintop station. "This is Callie Dane, coming to you from what used to be dead air. If you're listening, you're not alone. A story just broke, and it's already being buried. About Haletech, about lies too big for courts. But someone out there made sure the truth leaked first. Whoever you are, thank you. Caleb froze. Lena looked up sharply. Was that? He nodded. That was her. The radio hissed, then resumed. Sometimes justice doesn't show up in a uniform. Sometimes it walks on 4 legs and keeps watch while the world pretends not to care. If you're near Pine Creek, you might have heard the barking. You might have seen the cabin glowing in the snow. You might have felt something shift. They all looked at Odin. He was already standing, tail slow and steady, eyes fixed on something none of them could see. Still guarding? Lena whispered. Odin didn't move, didn't blink. Outside the wind blew, but the cabin held strong. Inside, something softer took root, something between peace and purpose. And far away in the dark offices of men who once thought they were untouchable, the dominoes kept falling. The wind carried a hint of pine and wood smoke as it whispered through the hills of Sanctuary Ridge. The old cabin was no longer just a shelter made from weathered boards and second-hand nails. It had been transformed, sanded down, repainted, reinforced, not to erase its past, but to honor it. Now it bore a sign carved by hand and hung above the doorway. Sanctuary Ridge, a place to begin again. Children's laughter echoed from the open yard as dogs, most with their own battle scars, romped and played. Some of the kids had never known a safe place before. Others were still learning how to trust. But here, among the trees and the animals, something steady had begun to grow. Caleb sat on the porch, elbows resting on his knees, watching it all unfold with a quiet pride. A year ago, he wouldn't have imagined this. People depending on him, laughter in the air, warmth in the walls. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He wasn't just the man who had outlived his team. He had built something. Behind him, the door creaked open. Lena stepped out, clipboard in hand, her braid swinging behind her. "We've got 2 new intakes arriving this evening," she said. "One of them's a teenage girl, the other a vet, female, army medic, rough shape." Caleb nodded, then reached down to scratch behind Odin's ears. The shepherd was greyer now, especially around the muzzle, but his eyes still tracked everything with that calm, watchful intensity. "He'll be fine," Caleb said, not looking away from the yard. "He knows how to greet ghosts." Lena gave a soft laugh and leaned against the porch railing beside him. "You ever think we'd end up here, after everything?" Caleb glanced toward the yard where June was kneeling in the grass, showing a little boy how to hold a rope toy for one of the younger rescue dogs. The boy was missing his front teeth and kept giggling every time the puppy tugged. "No," Caleb said. "Not once." They sat in companionable silence for a moment until a low, guttural bark broke it. Odin had risen to his feet, head tilted toward the tree line. Caleb followed his gaze. A woman stood at the edge of the trees, hesitating. Her clothes were clean but rumpled, and her hands were clenched tightly by her sides. Next to her, a girl about 12 held on to the leash of a lanky golden retriever. The dog looked nervous, ribs faintly showing beneath its fur. Lena exhaled. "That's them." Caleb stood and stepped off the porch. Odin followed, slow but steady, his tail giving a single wag. As they approached, the girl's eyes widened at the sight of the shepherd. She whispered something to her mother, then crouched to pet her own dog, trying to reassure them both. Caleb stopped a few feet away. "You're safe here," he said simply. The woman looked like she didn't know how to believe it yet, but she gave a short nod. Odin took one more step and gently pressed his head against the girl's hip. The golden retriever tensed, then sniffed, and relaxed. The moment passed like a sigh in the forest. Later that evening, after the sun had dipped behind the ridge and the porch lights cast soft halos in the dark, Caleb sat again beside Odin. The shepherd's breathing was slower these days, but he still refused to sleep before everyone else had settled in. You've earned your rest, old boy, Caleb murmured. But I know. You're still on watch. Inside, June led the kids in a story circle, her voice rising and falling with the rhythm of healing. Lena finished her notes by lamplight. In the far bunkroom, the new arrivals lay on fresh sheets, hearing only the sound of night frogs and distant crickets. It was quiet, peaceful, but not still. A sudden knock came at the front gate. Caleb stiffened. Odin's ears perked. He stood slowly, stepping down from the porch and into the darkness. When he opened the gate, a young man stood there. Clean clothes, pale face, and in his hand a folder with government markings. "Sorry to come so late," the man said. "Are you Caleb Boone?" Caleb nodded, wariness flickering in his eyes. The man swallowed. "We found something, in the records, about what happened in Dune Hollow, the truth about why your team was burned." Caleb's spine straightened. "What truth?" The man hesitated, then handed over the file. "They lied. It wasn't a mistake. It was a cover-up, and they're still trying to bury it." From the shadows, Odin growled. A low, measured sound. Caleb didn't move. He held the file, the past suddenly as real as the soil beneath his boots. "They thought if they waited long enough, you'd stop asking questions," the man said. But then, this place started drawing attention. Caleb looked toward the cabin, toward Lena, June, the kids, then down at Odin. The shepherd's eyes locked with his. Not done yet. Caleb tightened his grip on the folder and stepped back into the light of the porch. The war wasn't over, but this time they weren't fighting it alone. The sky above Sanctuary Ridge stretched in soft watercolor hues, streaks of apricot and pearl gray bleeding into the mountain tops. A school bus rumbled down the gravel road, tires crunching, the engine echoing briefly between the trees before it settled near the newly built welcome sign, Sanctuary Ridge, a place to begin again. 20 or so children poured out, most of them wide-eyed, some already clutching donated notebooks and pencils. A woman in a navy windbreaker with a school badge pinned to her chest guided them toward the trail that curved through the trees and toward the main lodge. At the head of that trail stood a carved wooden statue. It was life-size, the wood stained dark, its form both noble and understated. A German shepherd sitting with quiet alertness, eyes forward, tail wrapped neatly around his front paws. Time had worn the edges of the real Odin, but here he was forever young, forever watchful. A little girl, freckles scattered across her nose, stopped and stared up at the statue. "Is that the dog from the story?" she asked, tilting her head back to look at the shepherd's carved eyes. Behind her, a man approached, hands in his jacket pockets. Grayer now, beard trimmed, movements slower than they once were, but his voice still carried a quiet command of the space. "That's Odin," Caleb said. "He didn't bark for food. He barked for a second chance." The girl looked up at him. "What does that mean?" Caleb knelt beside her, resting a hand on the statue's paw. "It means he stood guard when no one else would. He saw something broken and didn't walk away." The group moved on, trailing toward the lodge where Lena waited to lead them in. But the girl lingered, brushing her fingers across the smooth cedar of the dog's ear. Inside the lodge, the faint voice of a woman played over the radio system. A recorded message that played every morning at the center's opening hour. "Some heroes don't wear uniforms," Lena's voice said. "They don't raise weapons or shout orders. They don't ask for medals. Some heroes just wait until someone listens." Caleb stood on the porch, watching the kids scatter toward the kennels where the younger dogs barked and wagged. Inside, June was helping 2 volunteers fit harnesses onto a pair of rescue shepherds, teaching a new group of visitors how to read the signals in a dog's ears, how to earn trust without words. She was smiling, talking, laughing. The girl who once wouldn't speak now had a waiting list of students who wanted her as their tour guide. Caleb walked down the steps and followed the curve of the path. He passed the vegetable garden June had planted, the stone bench Odin used to nap beside, the section of trees where they buried Odin's ashes in spring, wrapped in a flag, beneath a pine that leaned toward the light. Beside the roots, a small plaque read, "Still guarding." As the children laughed and played and filled the ridge with life, the forest seemed to lean closer, not to listen, but to remember. And on the radio, Lena's voice whispered once more, "Not every truth shouts. Some just wait patiently, like a dog at the door, like a second chance." The wind picked up, and somewhere in the trees, if you listened closely, you could almost hear paws in the leaves. Not chasing, not retreating, just waiting. Waiting for the next broken soul to find the trail, waiting for someone to listen. He didn't bark for food, he barked for the forgotten. What's your story with a loyal pet? If this story moved you, helped you feel something, or reminded you of a dog who changed your life, share it. And if you want more stories about courage, healing, and the German shepherds who never gave up, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and tell us, who's still guarding your heart?